For 6 centuries, one empire waged war non-stop. They battled kings, sultans, republics, crusaders, rebels, and the great emerging powers of Europe. They conquered nations, lost them, redrew their map, survived endless crises, and kept an army constantly marching from the Balkans all the way to the Arabian Desert. And here is the truly incredible part. Through all of it, they did something almost no other empire in history ever managed to pull off. They never went bankrupt. Why? Because the Ottoman Empire wasn't just a fighting force. They figured out how to finance endless war. Welcome to the History Engine, where you can see the historical reality is as simple as they seem. The Ottoman Empire spanned from roughly 1299 to 1922. That's longer than the Roman Empire, longer than the British Empire, and longer than almost any state we talk about in the modern world. But their sheer longevity isn't the most interesting mystery. The real question is how an empire that was almost constantly at war didn't just collapse under the sheer financial pressure. We in the West often imagine empires fall because they lose a few big battles. But battles don't actually bankrupt nations. Budgets do, leaders do, logistics do. The Ottomans learned this early. Instead of building a standard tax-on-army system like the kingdoms of Europe, they engineered something far more efficient, a machine where war could fundamentally pay for itself. But before we dive into the genius mechanisms, we have to establish what the Ottomans actually were. For many Western viewers, the empire is just a vague cinematic idea. Turbans, sultans, domes, and janissaries. We know the imagery, but we don't know the centuries-long financial engine behind it. So, let's slow down and set the stage. The Ottomans started as a tiny frontier principality in northwestern Anatolia, led by Osman I, a warlord with a few thousand riders and an amazing talent for being in the right place at the right time. When the Byzantine Empire began its slow, agonizing crumble and Mongol power receded from the Near East, Osman's followers were perfectly positioned to carve out new territory. Their early victories weren't just military wins, they were immediate financial windfalls. Every single conquest meant new land, new resources, new crops, new taxes, and most importantly, new populations to extract revenue from. And that's the first core key to understanding the Ottoman financial system. From day one, warfare wasn't seen as a cost. It was an income stream. By the time the Ottomans captured Bursa in 1326, and then crossed into Europe in the 1350s, they had stopped being a mere frontier tribe. They became the dominant power, controlling the key trade routes between Europe and Asia. In medieval economics, this is like having a monopoly on the world's main arteries. Every merchant traveling from Venice to Persia, from Cairo to Budapest, from Baghdad to Istanbul, had to pass through an Ottoman toll gate. Why did this matter so much? War requires 3 things: food, metal, and men. The Ottomans didn't necessarily have more of these than their neighbors, but they had something far more crucial: cash flow. Their empire was built on the richest crossroads of the pre-modern world. Silk, spices, carpets, horses, weapons, timber, sugar, copper, everything moved through their territory, and every time something moved, the Ottomans taxed it. However, a strong revenue base alone doesn't explain how the empire funded centuries of campaigns stretching from the walls of Vienna down to the mountains of Yemen. After all, almost every empire in history had revenue, and most still collapsed under the weight of military costs. What made the Ottomans truly different was structural design. They created a financial system that essentially turned the army into a self-financing institution. This is where the story shifts from geography to pure genius engineering, leading us to one of the most vital and misunderstood innovations in Ottoman history, the timur system. Imagine a government trying to completely eliminate its single biggest cost: payroll. Modern states spend fortunes on professional soldiers' salaries, equipment, horses, pensions. Militaries are a massive budget drain. The Ottomans bypassed this problem by simply refusing to pay soldiers in cash. Instead, they paid them in rights. A timur was basically a tax district. A soldier, usually a cavalryman known as a sipahi, was granted the right to collect taxes from a specific village or region. In exchange, he had a clear obligation: equip himself, maintain his horse, and show up for campaigns with proper armor and weapons. He didn't receive a salary, he funded himself. It was one of the most brilliant pieces of financial engineering in world history. The state drastically reduced its direct expenses. The soldier became directly invested in local stability because stable villages meant stable tax collection. The peasants lived under a predictable local authority, and the empire had a huge army that could mobilize quickly without ever emptying the central treasury. Imagine if the US government today paid a soldier, not with a bank transfer, but with the right to collect taxes from a county. If that sounds risky, you're right, but in the 1300s and 1400s, it worked spectacularly well. It turned the Ottoman cavalry into a tax-powered military machine, and it meant that, crucially, Ottoman warfare was cheap. Europe at the time relied on costly knights or mercenaries who demanded payment up front. If a king ran out of money, his army lost its loyalty. The Ottomans never had that problem. Their soldiers' funding flowed even during peacetime. War didn't strain the budget, it activated the system. But the timur system wasn't the only mechanism. They had another innovation, one that Western audiences often know by name but rarely understand the full financial implications of: The Janissaries and their funding model was another core piece of the Ottoman financial engine. To understand the second part of the Ottoman war financing engine, we need to look at the Janissaries, the elite infantry corps that foreigners feared, Christians resented, and sultans trusted more than their own families. They were professional, disciplined soldiers, trained from youth, and loyal to the state alone, the closest thing the Middle Ages had to Marines. But what made them financially unique was how the empire acquired and financed them. The Janissaries came from the devshirme, often called the child levy, in Christian villages across the Balkans. Boys were selected, removed from their homes, converted to Islam, and educated in the empire's military schools. They were trained, indoctrinated, and molded into a class of soldiers who owed absolutely everything to the central state, not to tribes, not to landlords, not to regions. The ethics of this system are clearly harsh and coercive, and we shouldn't romanticize it. But financially, it achieved something no other empire managed. The state acquired elite soldiers without paying the high upfront cost of raising, training, and equipping men from birth. The empire invested heavily in their education, yes, but the initial economic burden of raising children to adulthood was effectively outsourced to the conquered populations. This meant the Ottoman Empire obtained fully formed soldiers without incurring the lifetime expenses that would bankrupt a regular treasury. Once these soldiers entered service, they were paid and housed, but they were also restricted from marrying or owning businesses in their early centuries, which prevented conflicts of interest and kept the state in total control. If the timur system made the cavalry self-financing, the Janissaries made the infantry a highly efficient, low-cost professional corps. Combined, this military system saved the empire unquantifiable amounts of money over centuries. But the Ottomans didn't stop there. They perfected something even more powerful, making sure that war paid for war. Whenever the empire conquered new territory, they didn't just gain land, they gained new taxpayers, new timurs, new trade routes, new ports, and new revenue streams. Every single conquest financially strengthened the foundation for the next campaign. A European kingdom might win a war and come home poorer. The Ottomans usually came home richer. This is the heart of their long-term survival strategy, not luck, cash flow. Look at the geography again. The Ottoman Empire straddled the Bosporus, the Dardanelles, the Eastern Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the caravan routes to Persia and Central Asia. If you wanted to move goods from Europe to Asia or vice versa, you paid the Ottomans. Silk from China, spices from India, carpets from Persia, you paid the Ottomans. Venetian merchants, Arab traders, Balkan caravans, they all passed through the empire's financial toll booth. This system worked so well that by the 1500s, the empire was one of the wealthiest states on earth. War was expensive, but trade was more profitable, and the empire built specific financial systems to tap into that profit directly. One was state monopolies. Certain key commodities, salt, tobacco, coffee, sometimes soap, were controlled directly by the state. These were goods essential for daily life, which meant money flowed predictably right into the treasury. This is where the story starts sounding eerily modern, because state monopolies are the ancestors of today's strategic national industries. Think oil in Saudi Arabia, think gas pipelines in Russia, think the Suez Canal in Egypt. Every empire has a revenue anchor, and for the Ottomans, these monopolies were their perpetual income machine. Another smart financial strategy was the use of tribute and vassal states. Many regions, from Crimea to Wallachia, paid annual sums to the Ottoman treasury in exchange for protection or autonomy. It was cheaper to accept tribute than to govern directly, and that income funded the soldiers, roads, fortresses, and fleets. But the real brilliance and eventual weakness of the Ottoman financial system was how it delayed the need for borrowing. For centuries, the empire lived within its means. War was financed by land grants, trade tolls, tribute, plunder, and monopolies. There was no national debt spiral, no giant bond market draining the treasury, no foreign lenders deciding the empire's fate that couldn't last forever. By the late 1600s and 1700s, the world fundamentally changed. European powers industrialized. Their armies adopted new expensive technologies. Their global trade networks shifted to the oceans, bypassing the old Ottoman land routes. Suddenly, the empire could no longer rely on caravans and tolls to finance its military. Worse, the timur system began to decay. Local tax holders abused their power. Central oversight weakened, and the soldiers became less reliable. Then came the Janissaries. Over the centuries, they gained enormous political influence, wealth, and privilege until they effectively became a state within a state. Their financial independence and political clout made them impossible to control. They resisted reforms, drained the treasury, and became one of the biggest obstacles to modernization. When the empire finally started adopting expensive European-style armies, they needed something they had avoided for centuries: cash salaries. And to fund that, they turned to something even more dangerous: foreign loans. In the 1800s, the Ottoman Empire began borrowing heavily from European banks at cripplingly high interest rates. The same European powers it had once outplayed now controlled its finances. Debt spiraled, payments fell behind. In 1881, the empire was forced to hand control of its finances to an international commission run by France and Britain, a humiliating end to centuries of financial independence. It's a familiar pattern, isn't it? A great power rises on financial discipline, holds itself together with innovative systems, ignores the early warning signs, and eventually collapses when the economics simply stop working, which brings us to today. If you think the Ottoman system sounds ancient, just look around. The very same mechanisms still exist there, just wearing modern clothes. The old Timur system functions today as government contracts and privatized military logistics. Modern states outsource massive parts of their military operations to private companies, reducing the direct payroll burden exactly the way the Ottomans once did. Trade tolls have become the modern struggle for control over global shipping lanes and energy routes. From the Strait of Hormuz to the South China Sea, whoever controls the choke point controls the revenue that passes through it. State monopolies live on through national oil companies and sovereign wealth funds. Saudi Aramco plays the same role the Ottoman salt monopoly once did, just on a scale of trillions instead of millions. Conquest paying for conquest still exists in the form of resource-driven wars. Countries pursue territory or influence not for glory, but for energy reserves, minerals, pipelines, and strategic geography. And late borrowing, the ultimate downfall of the Ottoman Empire, echoes today in modern national debt crises. Many states fund their deficits with endless loans until the system cracks. Think Argentina, think Greece, think even the modern US debt debate. The core financial logic of empire doesn't change, only the uniforms do. So what's the lesson here? Empires don't die on the battlefield, they die on the balance sheet. The Ottomans survived 6 centuries because their financial system was disciplined, efficient, and brilliantly designed to turn war into revenue. They collapsed when that system finally broke, when expansion stopped paying for itself, when global trade routes bypassed their territory, when their soldiers became too expensive, and when the empire borrowed so much money that foreign creditors owned its future. And that's the deeper warning beneath their story. Financial systems can sustain power for centuries, right up until the day they can't. History doesn't exactly repeat itself, but if you don't understand it, it'll crush you all the same. For more videos like this, please like, comment, and subscribe.